Hi, I'm Zach, and in this video, we're going to discuss policies in Pomerium Zero. Now to do that, we're going to build a policy that controls access to an upstream service called Code Server. If you're not familiar with Code Server, it's an open source product that runs VS Code in your browser. Okay, so let's get started. So in the Zero console, head to the Policies tab. You'll see a list of policies currently in this cluster, and you can see which ones are assigned to routes and which ones are not, and when they were last updated. This first policy, any authenticated user, is a default policy that's attached to any route when you create it. What it does is it instructs Pomerium to grant access to any authenticated user or service account. This is a override setting, so you can turn it off or on right here, and under the attached routes, we can see which routes are currently using this policy. And we see Code Server, so let's go check it out. When we access it, you can see I have access. That's because I've already authenticated against our identity provider, so that policy definitely works. So next we're going to look at a more complex policy called matching gmail.com domain. What this does is it tells Pomerium to only grant access if the user's email address ends in gmail.com. For policy enforcement, we set this policy to optional, so it only applies to the route that we attach it to. If we set it to enforce, then it will apply to all the routes in our cluster. We've skipped the override settings, and you can see down here in this allow block how I've built my policy. Now if we go to the Advanced tab, you'll see I've added a description, an explanation, and remediation steps for our users. And under attached routes, we can see that there are no attached routes to this policy right now, so we can go ahead and do that. Let's go to Code Server. Let's remove the old policy. We're going to add this new one. And I've already selected Show Error Details. Let's save our route and apply the change set. Now let's access Code Server and see what happens. You can see I got a 403 forbidden message. Explanation is email must contain domain specified in policy criteria, and for remediation steps, this email doesn't contain the correct domain to access this service. Make sure you're using a gmail.com email address, and I'm using a pomerium.com email address, so I obviously was denied access. So we can change this policy so that it grants access to anyone with the pomerium.com domain and their email address, but then that just grants access to anyone that works here. So something like Code Server, you probably only want your engineers to have access to, right? So what you could do in that case is create a new policy that only grants access to a certain subset of users. In this case, let's call it only allow engineering. Going to add an allow block, add an or operator, email as our criterion. This requires a full email address. So we're going to enter example email addresses. These are our engineering members. And let's just do 3 of them. Okay, going to save our policy, go to our routes, let's update it. We're going to remove the old policy, add our new one, only allow engineering. Let's save our route. Let's apply the change set. And let's see what happens when we click on Code Server. And I am denied access. So we just briefly covered policies in Pomerium Zero. If you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our capabilities page and our documentation or some of our guides for more examples.